Now, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi says his country killed more than 100 terrorists in hideouts and training centres in airstrikes on Pakistan last week. The Prime Minister was speaking during a televised address for the first time since a weekend ceasefire that ended 4 days of cross-border missile, drone and artillery attacks between India and Pakistan. Mr Modi said India had only paused its military action and would make no distinction between governments that support terrorism and terrorist groups. Last week's violence killed dozens of people and sent thousands fleeing on both sides. It was the worst fighting between the nuclear rivals for a decade. Well, the Prime Minister said his message was clear.
Certainly, this is not an era of war. But this is also not an era of terrorism. I want to tell the international community it is our stated policy that if we talk to Pakistan, it will be on the issue of terrorism. If we talk to Pakistan, we will talk about Pakistan-occupied Kashmir.
Let's get more from our Delhi Bureau Chief, Sandra Petersmann. Welcome, Sandra. What else did the Prime Minister have to say today?
Well, it was a speech of roughly half an hour and it had a very emotional start. It was a victory speech, of course. And let me quote the Prime Minister. At the very beginning, he said, the Pahalgam terror attack was a brutal terror attack. The terrorists killed people based on religion. This was a personal pain for me. After this attack, the entire nation spoke in one voice. And we should perhaps remember here that out of the 26 civilians that were killed in this brutal attack, 25 were male Hindus, and of course that caused huge rage here in India. He then continued to say that he dedicates Operation Sindoor, that was the name of India's military operation, to the mothers and sisters of the country, also indicating that he's reaching out to the many widows. It was an operation to serve justice, that was his strong emphasis. He also said that India has proven that our made in India defense equipment was good in modern warfare, because a lot of Indian defense equipment was, of course, also used in this operation, referring to drones, for instance. He said that at least 100 terrorists were killed in Indian precision strikes, which began in the night from May 6th to May 7th. And he then made the point that it was Pakistan, the Pakistan Director of Military Operations, who on May 10th reached out to India asking for truce. Again, there was no mention of any third-party involvement, especially not of the USA. And Modi made quite clear that this Operation Sindoor, again, that was the name of the military action, is the new normal when it comes to dealing with Pakistan, indicating that India has paused strikes but would strike again, Phil.
OK, so there is a ceasefire at the moment. Does it seem like it will hold?
At the moment, it is holding, but we should not forget this is a ceasefire, not more and not less. It's not the solution of the Kashmir conflict, which is incredibly complicated, which dates back to the end of British colonial rule in India in 1947, which then led to the division of Kashmir, to the partition in an Indian and an Pakistani part. But both claim it in full, claim it as their integral territory, and it touches a very sensitive nerve in both countries. And as far as India is concerned, the solution is between India and Pakistan. For India, it is very much an internal matter and nothing for international mediation. And perhaps that's also the reason why India is avoiding so much to acknowledge diplomatic pressure, which was seemingly there from the United States, but also from Arab nations like Saudi Arabia or the United Arab Emirates.
And what of the Indian public? What are they making of the way their government has handled this latest outbreak of hostilities with Pakistan?
Obviously, you could also see jubilation in the streets when the ceasefire was announced on Saturday afternoon, local time here. But people also, especially in the affected region along the line of control, are also apprehensive. They are scared that there might be another round if should there be another violation of the ceasefire. So, and also looking at the media here, especially the electronic media, the newsrooms were literally turned into war rooms, setting the tone for much of the debate, which was very and continues to be very hyper-nationalistic, very jingoistic, I would say.
Thank you for that, Sandra. At DW's Delhi Bureau Chief, Sandra Petersmann.
And I can now talk to Shashi Tharoor. He's a member of parliament from the main opposition Congress Party and chairman of the Committee on External Affairs. He joins us from Delhi now. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us today. Now, we just heard Prime Minister Modi saying that this is not an era of war. Can this be understood as a promise to not let this conflict escalate?
Well, he was quoting himself, really. It's a line he addressed to Mr. Putin during the Ukraine war, when speaking in Samarkand at a public meeting. He said, "Mr. President, this is not an era of war." And since he has now embarked upon punitive military action against Pakistan, he is anticipating being reminded of his own line. And he is saying it's not an era of war, but it's not an era of terrorism either. And I think, frankly, what he did against Pakistan in the last few days was unavoidable. It had got to a point where Indians were exasperated with the notion that people in Pakistan think they can just walk across the border, kill innocent civilians, just ordinary tourists, and walk right back with impunity. Some kind of punitive action was essential, and that's precisely what Mr. Modi and his government did. They struck a number of sites across Pakistan that were associated with terrorist organizations, which were headquarters of terrorist groups. And apparently, according to his own figures today, they caused a number of casualties.
What has India achieved with this military operation? Sorry to jump in there.
No, you're right to jump in. It's just that what India has achieved is it has demonstrated a willingness to take its response a step higher each time. Back in 2015, when the Pakistanis hit the Indian airbase of Pathankot, Mr. Modi very generously invited Pakistan to join an investigation into the crime. The Pakistanis sent their intelligence people over to look at the Indian airbase and went back and said, "Oh, the Indians did it to themselves." That was the last straw, and thereafter, one after the other, each of the red lines India had observed up to then have been shed. For example, in September of 2016, there was an attack at a town called Uri. At that point, India crossed the line of control to mount a surgical strike against the base from which that attack had been launched, whereas the line of control separating the two countries had never been breached, even during the war that was fought against Pakistan in 1999 over Kargil. Next step, there was an attack on 40 Indian soldiers in January of 2019. India this time breached not only the line of control, it breached the international border by striking a Pakistani terror base in a place called Balakot. This time, April 2025, it went further still. It breached not just the line of control, not just the international border, it struck at the heartland, the Punjabi heartland of Pakistan, by attacking towns where proscribed terrorist organizations had their bases and headquarters. The Lashkar-e-Taiba in Maritke, the Jaish-e-Mohammed in Bahawalpur were hit right in these towns. And these were each of these sends a new signal that India is shedding its inhibitions one after the other and going after the terrorists where they are based. And that's
Modi
a strong message to Pakistan too.
Sorry to interrupt you there again, but Prime Minister Modi has taken a significantly tougher approach to attacks on Indian soil than the government you yourself were part of until 2014. So let me ask you personally, do you believe military action can solve problems between India and Pakistan?
Well, I'm afraid in this particular case, we had no choice, I believe, but to react militarily as well as through diplomatic and other means, because we had already exhausted all these other things. You know, you were in a situation right now, ma'am, where we not only have no ambassadors in each other's countries, there's practically no trade, there are practically no visas being exchanged. We did, until this particular crisis erupted, we did permit a lot of Pakistani patients to come for medical treatment in India, but even that's now been dialed down. There's pretty much left to do in terms of conventional diplomatic measures to convey our disapproval of Pakistan's nurturing, financing, equipping, guiding, and dispatching these terrorists. And so finally, something kinetic, a sort of physical military action was unavoidable. And I must say the nation has stood with the government and the armed forces on this. We are not a warmongering nation. In fact, we have never in our history initiated an attack on anybody. But we cannot just keep lying back and taking it. And that's precisely why it was
we only have about a minute until we go off air. So let me ask you this, because you have criticized Donald Trump's claims of having mediated between India and Pakistan, especially at a time where you say that all diplomatic routes have been exhausted. Is this not the time for third-party mediation?
How do you mediate between killers and their victims? How do you mediate between people who have been systematically for 30 years dispatching terrorists to kill ordinary innocent civilians and those whose job it is to protect these civilians? The problem with mediation is that it doesn't work. What will work is if Pakistan dismantles its terror infrastructure, decides to abandon that path of confrontation, and believes it can live in peace on the subcontinent with its neighbors. Right now, you've got, as Voltaire said about Prussia, you don't have a state that has an army, you have an army that has a state.
We have to leave it there. We're out of time, unfortunately. That was Shashi Tharoor, member of the Indian Parliament. Thank you so much.